Hello, and welcome again to the Inflation Reduction Act listening session. My name is Sherry McCarter, and I'll be one of the facilitators for today's session. Now, I'd like to turn it over to Jackie Ponte-Lazaric, RD's Chief Innovation Officer, to get us started. Jackie?
Thanks, Sherry, and welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's listening session. This is one of 3 listening sessions we are conducting and will be aimed at rural communities, rural small businesses, ag producers, and tribal nations. The goal of these meetings is to provide an opportunity for stakeholders and other interested parties to offer their feedback and input to further assist the Rural Business-Cooperative Service and the Rural Utilities Service in implementing the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 and designing products that benefit all of rural America. Your feedback will be analyzed along with comments submitted through the Federal Register comment process to assist the Rural Utilities Service and the Rural Business-Cooperative Service in implementing the Act. We understand that this is an important topic and we want to hear from you. While we may not have enough time to highlight all of your feedback today, please know that you may leave your remarks in the chat and they will be included in data discovery. We are also accepting written comments, and you'll hear more about that and where to file those later in today's session. Now let's go over an overview of our agenda today. We'll start with some welcoming remarks from our senior leadership, and then we will be providing a brief overview of the Inflation Reduction Act and the provisions that apply to rural development and our RBCS and RUS programs. And then it'll be time for us to listen to you and hear from you about what you think would be best in terms of implementation of the Act and any concerns you'd like to raise. And then we'll have a call to action with some final thoughts and a wrap up to talk about next steps and things you'll want to be thinking about after you leave today's session. As part of today's session, we wouldn't be the government if we didn't have acronyms. So we thought we'd list a few of the acronyms you'll hear today, and you'll see them here on the screen. HBIP is our High Blends Infrastructure Incentive Program. IRA, of course, is the Inflation Reduction Act. RBCS is our Rural Business-Cooperative Service agency. REAP is our Rural Energy for America program. RUS is our Rural Utilities Service. And RD is our Rural Development Mission Area. And we'll be using the acronyms throughout the session. And we wanted you to have these as a ready guide. So we hope that you find today's session useful and engaging, and that you provide us with lots of good input that will help us as we complete implementation and move these funds and products out to you. With that, I'll hand it over to Rural Development's Chief of Staff, Stephanie Bezruki. Stephanie?
Hey, Jackie, thank you so much. Welcome, everybody, and thanks for joining the listening session today. Your participation and comments mean a lot at what is a critical stage in implementation of the Inflation Reduction Act. This incredibly historic piece of legislation that's become law under the Biden-Harris administration. By being here, you're part of what is a once in a generation opportunity. And you might keep hearing that on this call today because it's true. It's an opportunity to build critical infrastructure, support farmers, ranchers, and landowners, and to make rural electric systems more resilient, reliable, and importantly, affordable. So here you'll see the provisions of the law that will be implemented by USDA Rural Development. I don't need to read them to you. I would rather tell you what the Inflation Reduction Act means. It's saving families money on utility bills. It's supporting 4,100 farmers, ranchers, and rural small businesses to help them invest in renewable energy systems and energy efficiency improvements. This is historic investments in our rural electric co-ops who make the lights come on for 42 million Americans every day. Help them invest in clean energy projects, energy efficiency improvements, and zero emission systems. Also means boosting the availability of clean fuel, making sure that retailers like our local gas stations and distributors have the infrastructure to support fuels with higher blends of biofuels. And something I think is especially important is it means creating good paying jobs and new economic opportunity in rural communities. And you're here today to help make that happen. So for that, I think I speak for everybody in saying how grateful we are. And again, thank you for joining us. So with that, I would like to turn it over to our administrator of the Rural Utilities Service, Andy Burke.
Well, hello, everybody. I can't quite get my video working, but that's no problem. You can see my picture up on here, and I apologize for the background music, but I'm actually at the airport about to get on a plane, but this was incredibly important, and I wanted to make sure that I attended. So President Biden has really signed this groundbreaking piece of legislation, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is set to transform our country. And it is the biggest investment in clean energy that we've ever seen in this world. This is going to be an opportunity for all of us to really transform the areas in which we live, and particularly rural America. I'm from Tennessee. When I was growing up, the CBS broadcaster, Walter Cronkite, who was then known as the most trusted man in America, called my hometown, Chattanooga, the dirtiest city in America, and did a 1-hour special on it. Over the course of time, our community transformed to the point where in 2014, we were called Best Town Ever by Outside Magazine. But none of that would have occurred without the groundbreaking legislation that was the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. Again, making sure that the Tennessee River and our air could become cleaner and better. Now, we have this amazing opportunity again. As someone who comes from the place where President Roosevelt once said that we are going to electrify America through rural electrification and utilities like the TVA, we now have this opportunity again, and we have to hear from you. We are going to get this right. It's going to be for the Rural Utility Service, $11 billion of investment, but that is going to happen alongside of you with your support, with your understanding, and most of all, with your input. Today is the next step in the process, but it's certainly not the last. Over the course of the next few months, as we design these initiatives and how we can push them out, we're going to continue to listen to you. Thank you so much for all that I know many of you have done for years to make this day happen. And we look forward to working with you as we make rural America stronger and more prosperous through the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, with that, I want to turn it over to John to talk about this from the RCDS side.
Well, thank you so much, Administrator Burke, for sharing that. And thank you to everyone who's putting this opportunity together today. This is a really important set of issues. And when I say important, I really mean it. With just the programs that we're discussing today, tens of thousands of new renewable systems will go online in the coming years, which will power rural life in America for a generation with clean energy. That'll help farmers keep the farms in the family with new solar. Small businesses will cut their energy bills down to be smaller than their phone bills. And I mean that, I've seen it. When I see these programs will power rural life in America, I don't just mean keeping the lights on either. The $2.5 billion that the Rural Business-Cooperative Service received in the IRA will be an economic engine for rural America, powering a resurgence of small towns and counties like the one I live in Virginia. For many of the 1,000 or so folks on this call today, this is about our homes and our futures. So with that, let's dig in to the two programs that received funding in the IRA for RBCS. The Rural Energy for America program, which I will refer to from here on out as REAP, and the Higher Blends Infrastructure Incentive Program that I'll refer to as HBIP from here on out. So REAP received $2 billion over the next decade to invest in 40 to 50,000 farms and small businesses. And that's broken up into two different ways. 1.7 billion of that is going to go into the REAP program as we know it. We'll talk about what that is in a minute. And 340 million goes to underutilized technologies and technical assistance. And that's to help folks apply and receive the grants. So what does REAP actually do? And who's going to be eligible for that? So REAP provides loans and grants for agriculture producers and rural small businesses as defined by the SBA. Agriculture producers can also apply for energy efficient equipment and new loans for processing and production on their farms. These grants can cover up to 50% which is up from the original 25% that the program had initially. Loan guarantees can cover up to 75% of those total eligible project costs. Combined, you can also get them in a combined fashion that will cover up to 75% of those total project costs. So the folks that are going to be eligible for this are going to be folks that are small businesses, again, as defined by the SBA, and agricultural producers in rural areas with a municipality cap number of people at 20,000. So what can you do? What can you put on the grid? Renewable energy projects that are going to be eligible that we've seen before: solar, wind, smaller hydroelectric, anaerobic digesters, biomass, geothermal, and if it applies to your state, it doesn't apply to everybody, but wave or ocean power. The bottom line here is it's a new system that produces renewable energy. So this is not an exhaustive list, especially not exhaustive when it comes to energy efficiency projects. These are projects for which the installation or the retrofitting that you're doing simply saves more energy than the current production you have. So traditionally, that would look like lighting, heating, cooling, ventilation, fans, automated controls, insulation. But people have gotten quite creative, depending on whatever your business needs. I want to give a couple of facts about REAP to help folks understand the program. Sometimes with government programs, it feels a bit out there, but REAP goes to farmers and small businesses in approximately equal amounts. And 69% of the REAP funds of 2022 went to solar projects. That's a pretty big chunk. That's not always been true. In past years, it's gone to other things. So what we do, and as these projects come to us, dictates what they end up going out to. So the average group size grant is $40,000. And I want to stick on this one for a second. We've got $2 billion for REAP, plus our mandatory funding. The average grant size is only around $40,000. That's a lot of people who are going to benefit from this around the country. Lastly, REAP does not discriminate by technology. So as long as it's a renewable system or it's more energy efficient than what it replaces, it's likely to be eligible. But work with state directors in your state offices, which there are 47, to work that out with them. So last thing I want to go over in REAP is an understanding of how the program trajectory looks. So there's 820,000 that has, or 820 million, excuse me, got to be thinking big. There's 820 million that has already been deposited into the Rural Energy for America program. But over the next 5 years, in fiscal years, which just ended for the government, the next 5 fiscal years will provide another 180 million. It's a pretty sizable increase for a program that was doing between $50 and $60 million a year. The total of that ends up being, like I said, about 1.7. The same thing is true with our underutilized renewable technologies and technical assistance funds. A certain amount of that, 144 million, has already gone in. And then each year for the next 5 years, another 31,800,000 will go into that program. The important thing to take away from this is that this isn't a 1 or a 2 year project. This is going to be a 5-year sustained effort to ensure that rural Americans have the clean energy they need to power their lives. Now let's switch over to HBIP. So unlike the previous program, HBIP generally be a set of more specific applicants. The goal of the program is to ensure that the higher blends of ethanol and biodiesel have the infrastructure that they need to be sold across the country. The folks who are applying for HBIP are generally transportation fueling facilities. Those are gas stations and convenience stores, fueling stations, fleet facilities, which we've now allowed for rail and marine as well, and similar entities. We've also got a set aside for fuel distribution facilities, terminal operations, depots, midstream partners, et cetera. They can use the funding for any sort of installation, retrofitting, or otherwise upgrading the infrastructure required to ensure environmentally safe availability of E15 or greater blends. HBIP received $500 million in the infrastructure in the IRA, and we'll be dispersing that over the course of the next few years as well. We expect that to impact over 5,000 stations across the country and reach states that we've been trying to reach with our E15 throughout the last few years. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our Assistant Administrator for the Rural Utilities Service, Chris McLean. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody in that very large listening audience. The Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, gave the Rural Utilities Service 2 new programs. First one is at 22001 in the statute, and then the other one is 22004. We are going to be talking about just the first one, which is additional funding for electric loans for renewable energy. And then tomorrow, mark your calendars, we will be talking about 22004, which is focused on additional resources for rural electric cooperatives. So we'll go to the explanation of what is in the statute for the additional funding for renewable energy. This provision amends or provides funding to an existing program within the Rural Utilities Service under Section 317 of the Rural Electrification Act. Congress and the President provided an additional $1 billion in budget authority for these loans, and the loans will carry an interest rate that is comparable to the municipal rate in effect at the time that the loan is made. In addition, Section 317 defines the types of renewable energy that would be eligible as wind, solar, hydropower, biomass, or geothermal sources of power. And then the Inflation Reduction Act adds to it electric storage in support of such projects. What is unique about Section 317 of the Rural Electrification Act is that it has among the most generous population determinations in the program, because under that statute, we are able to provide financing to renewable generation projects that provide for resale of power to rural and non-rural consumers. So we're able to look beyond just rural America and have projects that combine rural and non-rural service. Now, what the Inflation Reduction Act provides, which is a very unique twist on the Section 317 loan program, is that thanks to that $1 billion of budget authority, the statute authorizes up to 50% of loan forgiveness for projects approved under the authority of Section 317. And then furthermore, it also allows the Secretary to describe criteria to go beyond that 50%. In addition to the provisions that are included in the IRA, like the funding for Section 317, there are, and the cooperative provisions we'll talk about tomorrow, we're very cognizant and excited about other provisions within the IRA, such as a host of clean energy tax incentives for developers, for consumer-based energy efficiency, for EV purchases, for charging stations, for investments in renewable energy systems. And most notably, the IRA provides direct pay tax incentives for cooperatives, as well as municipals and nonprofit entities. And the IRA provided another stream of funding for green banks. And at the Rural Utilities Service, we cannot speak for any other federal agencies, but we do welcome opportunities to be able to leverage our programs with other federal programs, and certainly look forward to having the investment tax credits and production tax credits soon to have the regulations proposed by the Department of Treasury to be supportive of the types of investments we're seeking in our programs as well. So there's a couple of really key things to understand about all of the provisions we're talking about today in the Inflation Reduction Act, because it was passed as part of a legislative vehicle known as reconciliation, there are very strict time limitations on the use of funds. So under the IRA, funds must be dispersed before September 30th, 2031. So let me be very clear about what that means. That means that we will have to, within that amount of time, the two agencies here will have to launch our program. We'll have to open up our gates for applications. We'll have to review those applications on where we have lending, underwrite those loans. Where we have competition, we would have to rank those applications. And then we'll have to make selections. Projects will have to go through environmental review for very large scale renewable projects at the utility scale level, that the type that we do at the Rural Utility Service. It could be a major environmental review, such as an environmental impact statement. And then the projects have to be built and with all of the funds advanced before the last day of fiscal year 2031. So working backwards from the time it takes to build a project, to clear a project for environmental review, to validate the delivery of the project and the performance of the project, those less than 9 years are going to go by very, very quickly. So with that timetable in mind, we are keeping in mind these watchwords of speed, simplicity, and familiarity, because we believe those are key to crafting a successful program. Now, what today is all about is, for us at the USDA and our colleagues, we have colleagues in the audience from other parts of the federal government, including the Department of Energy, Environmental Protection Agency, White House, Department of Interior, and other federal agencies listening in as well. We want to hear from you. Your input is critical. We want to be able to create programs that will work for communities and those who are going to have to invest money to be able to build these renewable systems. So with that, I am going to turn the program back over to Sherry, who will begin the listening session, and our ears are wide open. So thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you, Chris. And I want to touch on a couple of things that you mentioned. One of those being that we would like to recognize our federal partners representing the Department of Energy, the Small Business Administration, the United States Geological Survey, the White House Chief of Staff, and U.S. Senate Committee on Ag, Nutrition, and Forestry, and also state elected officials who are supporting us today by attending our session. I want to go over a few basic guidelines to keep in mind while participating. And reiterating what Chris just said, this is a reminder that this is a listening session. So we want to hear from you. We will be asking a series of questions throughout the next portion of the session today to gain your feedback. And we want to hear from everyone who wishes to share. Please be mindful of this as you offer your feedback during the next 80 minutes or so. As facilitators, we'll do our best to ensure that all who wish to speak have an opportunity to do so. We reserve the right to step in and move the conversation forward if time is running short or if we veer off topic. Know that we may ask you to wrap up your remarks or place them in the chat box so they can be seen, and we can ensure that everyone has an opportunity to be heard. Please understand that our intention is not to stifle conversation or make anyone feel as though they can't share. Our intent is to foster an equitable conversation that lifts all perspectives. Also, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand and our host will unmute you. If during the conversation you are not comfortable replying verbally, please type your answer into the chat box. And finally, as a reminder, and for those of you who may have joined late, this session is being recorded and will be made publicly available on the IRA webpage. If you are not comfortable being recorded, you may leave the meeting and provide written comments electronically at www.regulations.gov. Comments must be submitted no later than November 28th, 2022. And for your convenience, we've included that link in the chat box. Next, I'd like to introduce Lou Torres from the Innovation Center's Customer Experience team. Lou?
Thank you, Sherry. And thank you to all our participants for taking the time to be here today. Today, we're going to be joined by Scott Sesterick. He's running back a house for us. And you heard from Sherry McCarter. Maggie Wilkins and Val Jensen are also from the Innovation Center Customer Experience team. We're all going to be co-facilitators guiding you through this conversation today. And we've got a couple of subject matter experts in the back of the house in case we have any questions. So in respect to time, we'd like to keep this on task, like Sherry had talked about. And so we ask you to respond to polling questions today. We're going to have some discussion questions, and we'll be asking you to place your information in the chat box. So with that, let's get started. We've heard a lot of information so far today about the Inflation Reduction Act, the statute, and some of the programs involved. There's a lot of research and work going in behind the stage here to implement Inflation Reduction Act. And so we want to hear from you to help us figure out what else we want to do. So that brings us to our first set of questions. And the first set of questions are going to be around program interest. And we're going to start with a polling question. So which type of funding are you potentially interested in? So please mark all that apply, all right? Is it the 317 loan for clean and renewable energy from RUS section 22001 of the Act? Or is it Rural Energy for America program, REAP, that RBCS offers section 2202 of the Act? Or is it Higher Blends Infrastructure Incentive Program, HBIP, from RBCS, the section 22003 of the Act? So please take a second, think about that. Oh, I see we've already got some people. Oh, thank you for being so responsive. So we've got quite a bit here. I'm looking at our polling results. Let's see. We're getting we've got a lot for REAP, and actually all our programs are looking at high interest. And so what is the level of interest? We've gone ahead and done that one. It's a high interest, which we're really excited to hear about. So based on your answers, it looks like there is a large interest of funding. We'd like to think about what projects you might be thinking about. Raise your hand and let us know if you're considering any future projects right now, any projects right away that are already going. So could you share with us any projects that you might be considering right now by raising your hand or putting that information in the chat box? So Maggie, do we have any hands raised?
Yes, we have several, and I'm going to call on Brendan Bell. So Brendan, if you could come off mute, and then you're free to ask your question or provide comments.
Sure, and thank you. My name is Brendan Bell. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Alliant Climate Capital. I'll keep this brief. We have been a RUS borrower since 2018. RUS has supported a number of solar projects that we own and operate, and we're really appreciative of the program and think it's a fantastic program, particularly with this new IRA authority. We will submit written comments as part of the process, but I would just flag 3 items that we would really encourage the department to think about as they implement the new Section 317 authority. One is just certainty. So coming from the private sector, the more that we understand the rules going in, particularly around loan forgiveness, that's how we can develop projects that will fit the requirements. If we don't find out how the program is going to work until we get to the loan documentation phase, I think that will dissuade people from participating in the program, and we just can't build projects that meet the criteria. So if RUS wants to incentivize, supporting LMI customers or encouraging sustainable land use for projects, we just need to know that up front and what the benefits are associated with that. The second is project eligibility. Right now, our understanding is RUS cannot finance community solar and other solar projects that have off-takers that are not municipal or utility customers. We think that misses a huge part of the market that could benefit from these programs, particularly for Section 317. And so we would encourage the department to document and expand the eligibility of potential off-takers for the new Section 317 authority. We think those are projects that can get done in the timeline laid out by the Inflation Reduction Act. And also, frankly, is the way to bring the benefits of clean energy to more rural communities. Third would just be on loan processing. We hope that these programs result in USDA being inundated with loan applications. But that's obviously going to stress the existing capacity of the program. And we would just encourage USDA to think about ways that loan processing could become more efficient, because we think that's, again, if you want people to use these programs, they need to be able to get loans done relatively quickly. And so other loan programs in the federal government, whether that's Export-Import Bank or DOE, use third-party advisors, including outside counsel, environmental consultants, independent engineers to help speed processing. The borrower pays for those services, but the department, they work for the department. We would encourage you to consider that. And then things as simple as, finding a protocol for taking digital signatures on loan documents versus requiring wet signatures. There's just some things that could speed up the process and I think would make people more interested in using the program. So thank you again to the agency for all your work on implementing this. We really appreciate it and think it can be a tremendous opportunity for rural America. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Brandon. Maggie, you said we had another hand up?
Yes. Harris Armstrong, if you want to come off mute.
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Harris Armstrong. I work with a company called Estuary Power. We're a developer, an independent power producer. In my past life, I did a lot of government guaranteed lending. So I'm very familiar with USDA and appreciative of this new opportunity. This is kind of a new foray into the rural utility service. It's going to be hard to, I think, speak after Brandon without piggybacking off a lot of what he said. So basically, I'd like to say ditto to everything Brandon shared, with one specific follow-up question kind of around the direct pay provision. We touched on it briefly and said that, at least from the RUS perspective, you'd be willing to work with direct pay just in conjunction with the IRS. But I just wanted to get a sense of how that may work within underwriting, or maybe just put it on USDA's, list of things to consider when they do their responses. Will that count towards debt service coverage ratio if you are an entity that can avail yourself to direct pay, especially with PTC? We're seeing, some banks establish views on, allowing those cash flows to factor into underwriting. So I wanted to put that on USDA's radar. Hopefully that will work in conjunction and, can get some feedback on that, in the near future. And with that, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. This is a really exciting time to be working with the Rural Utility Service and rural development.
Thank you very much for your comments. Maggie, I think we have another hand raised.
Yes. If Ian Michael wants to come off mute.
Hi, thank you very much. And again, it's Ian Michelle, but it's a common mistake. Again, ditto to the first two callers to keep this brief. We have company I'm with is Intersect Energy, and we have looked in the past to the USDA and RUS for programs that we never pulled the trigger on. But we right now have a number of projects at various stages in New Jersey where the off-takers will be municipalities, public entities, and the developments are in rural areas to be able to build at scale. So my questions, or would I like, again, more clarity and consistency with regard to the loan forgiveness. There is no mention when we're talking about new technologies. Would like some clarity on how that affects storage, which are critical to these programs, and also as a quote new user to the program. Again, eligibility to some of the costs. The major thing that we're dealing with in New Jersey projects have to do with the infrastructure, because especially in the rural areas, there's been a lack of money spent. So you're starting from scratch every time. So again, to make sure that, besides the development side itself, but interconnection costs, things of that nature, what would be allowed and not allowed would be very helpful for us as we move forward with these programs. So again, thank you very much for your time so far. This has been a great webinar, and I appreciate you doing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian, Michelle. Hey, Maggie, I'm going to pivot to Val and see if she has any questions or any comments and feedback in the chat box.
Thanks, Lou. Yes, I know we do see a lot of questions in the chat box. And one of the things I do just want to mention before we kind of move on a little bit is leadership is still helping, working on getting some of these items worked out. And so one of the things that we're doing today is we are wanting to take some input and feedback from you all as they work towards looking into putting some of these programs together to be able to use the IRA funds. But with regard to the types of projects that some of you have that you're thinking of for use of these IRA funds, we're seeing a lot of those options in the chat. We've got some geothermal, some energy efficiency upgrades, microgrids, distributed wind projects. We have some water and wastewater that are mentioned here, solar, hydro, and microgrids, community wind, biogas, to digital assets. We've got some that have some heat pump funding. So we're seeing a lot of different types of projects out here. And so thank you for letting us know what you may have that is that you're thinking of using or utilizing these IRA funds for.
Thank you, Val. So that we'll take one more comment on what kind of projects that you might be considering. Maggie, do we have another hand raised?
Yes, Corey Neely, if you want to come off mute.
Hi, I'm working on solar cooperatives, and this allows people to invest in solar farms. Primarily, people that live in those communities. Is there going to be any options for folks to, I guess, at least create co-ops like this on the state level or potentially regional level to build these farms out?
So Corey, today we're not really going to be spending lots of time answering questions, but we will certainly, if you put that question in the chat box, we'll make sure that it gets to one of our subject matter experts.
Or Corey, pose it as a recommendation as well.
Thank you, Chris. That's a great idea. And before we move into the next polling question, I would like to invite some of the people when you were registering for this event today had clicked that yes, you wanted to make a comment during the event. If you go ahead and raise your hand, Maggie will watch for that as we move forward today's event. And so thanks for this great discussion. I think we've got some great ideas for projects and some people highly interested, which really excites I know us here at Rural Development. And I'm going to ask Sherry if you could move us to the next set of questions around the application process. Sherry?
Thanks, Lou. I'll be glad to. This takes us to our next polling question. Are you familiar with the USDA application process? So we'll give you a minute to register your answers there. And I know someone who just spoke a minute ago said that they were very familiar with the process. So that's good, but we realize that some may not be. And that actually looks like the majority of the folks on with us today are not familiar with the USDA application process. So let's end the poll with, we've got about 61% who are not familiar with the application process for USDA. So in thinking about that, for those of you who answered no, please enter the type of technical assistance you think you would need in the chat box. Now, we understand at this point you may not know what type of technical assistance you may need, but just let us know if you anticipate needing technical assistance during the application process. Val, are you seeing a lot of answers in the chat about what type of technical assistance may be needed, or if technical assistance will be needed?
Yes, I'm starting to see some answers come in. We're seeing from those that yes, it would be needed. And yes, Eddie, this is in regard. This is just in regard to the application process, mainly for these programs that we're discussing today, not necessarily the 1RD application process. So we're just wondering, would you need some type of technical assistance? And if so, do you know what type that may be? And we're seeing some that are saying some simple guidelines for the environmental review. There's a comment around clarity on timelines, just seeing advice and clarification of technologies that can be used. Yes.
Good. Good.
Yes, we're seeing some different suggestions. One here saying it's almost always a good idea to provide technical assistance at stages in the process. So
great suggestion. Great suggestion. So this takes us to our next polling question. We thank you for all your input previously, but our next polling question as we move along is considering application timelines. How soon would you anticipate filing an application once IRA funding products are available? 0 to 6 months, 6 to 12 months, 1 to 2 years, 2 to 3 years, or 3+ years. And it looks like based on those answers that are coming in, it looks like 0 to 6 months and 6 months to 12 months are the highest that we're getting as far as the time frames to file an application. Great, great, great. Okay, thank you so much for those answers, and we're going to move along then to our next polling question. For those who are here today who are interested in REAP, understanding the time frame for construction, how soon do you anticipate starting a project that receives IRA funding? 18 to 24 months, 2 to 3 years, 3 to 4 years, 4 to 5 years, or 5 years plus. Okay, it looks like slowed down a bit, and it still looks like 18 to 24 months is getting the most answers. So we appreciate that. And right now we're going to go to our next polling question, where we move into RUS. So for those interested in RUS 317 funding, understanding the timeframes for construction, how soon would you anticipate starting a project that receives IRA funding?
And Sherry, we're seeing in the chat there are at least one person who thought 0 to 6 months, so that we may have some folks very ready.
Oh, good.
That wasn't one of the options, but we will log that in.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That's good information to have. Thank you. And it looks like right now, 18 to 24 months for the RUS 317 funding. 2 to 3 years, we've got a few, 3 to 4. We've got answers in each option there. Great, great. So now we're going to move on to our next discussion question. And this is where you can raise your hand to speak or put your answers in the chat box. So the next question is, how do you recommend the agencies balance the interest of large and small applicants? We understand that there will be different size applicants who will be interested in this funding and have applications from all different size applicants. So how do you think the agency should balance that interest between large and small applicants. I'll let you think on that for a second. And Maggie, are there any hands raised? Is anyone ready to give a thought on that?
Yeah, we have Sam O'Day. You want to come off mute and speak?
Good afternoon. My name is Sam O'Day with Power Energy Corp. Appreciate everyone's time and all the agencies, and especially the USDA. My question is in respect to the BIP, in respect to specifically, twofold. I apologize. One, in terms of the actual infrastructure. And what I mean by that specifically, one of the things we would like you to consider as we do this is specifically the materials above and beyond the dispenser or the tank scope. That's one fold. On the second part of giving some input here, what would be truly important as well, I think from a marketing awareness standpoint, is realizing getting the consumer awareness to the value, which is the advantages to the price point of the homegrown energy. We would like to see that in the future, if it can also be incorporated part of the program. Thank you again. Appreciate all your assistance.
Thank you, Sam. That's good information. And let's see if we've got Maggie. Is there anyone else who has their hand raised?
Yes, hi, Nick Planton. I'm with Shred Electric and the Boatyard LLC. We are developing and promoting electric snowmobiles as well as electric workboats for aquaculture and other businesses. In answer to your question about prioritizing small applicants versus large, I think it'd be great to make this as accessible for small applicants as possible, perhaps making the application process less cumbersome for smaller applicants who maybe don't have time or resources to engage staff to submit applications like these. And also it'd be great to think creatively about project eligibility so that some of these newer alternative energy efficient applications could qualify. Thank you.
Thank you. Val, let's see if we have any comments in the chat about have any recommendations on how the agency can balance the interest of large and small applicants.
Thanks, Sherry. Yes, we do have some comments. We have comments that smaller retailers or smaller systems should be taken into account, that half of funding for small, half for large, but I'm not sure how you define the two. Small applicants should have a different set of scoring criteria that emphasizes new approaches, innovations, and high reward. A comment stating that large need faster processing time. Another comment stating you could use past application data to determine fund allotment for small versus large applications, balancing large and small interests. Comment that they agree with the commenter that there should be goals with timeframes, but allow reallocations at state level to accommodate projects out there. And again, another one on more focus on smaller applicants. We have a comment here stating Justice 40 should be a factor. So lots of different ideas, and we thank you for submitting all of those.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Val.
Maggie and Sherry, if on that comment on Justice 40, if that person would be interested in coming on and or in the chat, providing a little more detail on what that would look like to you and how the agency might go about incorporating that in, we welcome that.
All right. Do you want to take one more hear from someone else that has their hand raised about
Yes.
how we can balance the interests of large and small applicants?
Yes, we have Eric Adelstad.
Okay, Eric.
Yes, hello. So my name is Eric Adelstad. I'm the Energy Democracy Program Director at CURE in Minnesota. Today, I just want to offer some brief comments on behalf of CURE and the Rural Power Coalition. Thank you for holding the session today and hearing our comments. So the electric cooperative programs in the Inflation Reduction Act offer our nation's electric cooperatives a historic opportunity to build rural communities, save rural Americans money, and act on the climate crisis. That's why the Rural Power Coalition is disappointed that the public process for these programs is so far set to be extremely brief. Rural communities deserve the opportunity to fully participate in the decisions that will impact their future. The USDA is under an executive order to apply the Justice 40 principles to this program, and the Rural Development Division should adopt protocols that require applicants to demonstrate benefits to communities, especially disadvantaged communities and energy transition communities. And it should strongly consider them through all phases of decision making. The Rural Power Coalition again urges you to follow the Justice 40 implementation process currently laid out by the Department of Energy. In direct response to the specific questions posed today regarding Section 22001 in the Inflation Reduction Act, the Rural Power Coalition offers these abbreviated comments. Rural electric cooperatives serve 42 million Americans, including 92% of federally recognized persistent poverty counties. Electric cooperatives are also among the most carbon-intensive utilities in the United States. This means that programs in the Inflation Reduction Act, like 22001, hold a big opportunity for the United States to make significant impacts in reducing costs for Americans who need it most and reducing emissions in the utilities that need to make the largest reductions. Considering this, electric cooperatives should be prioritized as recipients of this program. In order to incentivize the most progress towards these outcomes, we urge a tiered system of loan forgiveness based on meeting certain criteria. Criteria for forgiveness could include: 1, projects resulting in no new greenhouse gas emissions or immediate emissions reductions; 2, site-specific energy efficiency deployment that reduces costs for member owners; 3, projects with an established community benefit agreement. And criteria for surpassing the 50% forgiveness cap should include: 1, projects in Justice 40 disadvantaged communities, energy communities, or persistent poverty counties; 2, cooperatives with the highest debt to member owner ratio; and 3, cooperatives with the highest carbon intensity. We thank you for the opportunity to share some brief comments with you and look forward to opportunities for further discussion. Additional comments will be provided in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. And I think that is a great segue. Your comments are a great segue to what we're going to talk about next. And I would like to thank everyone so far who's provided feedback. And I'm going to now turn it back over to Lou to take us through our next series of questions.
Thank you, Sherry. And so we're going to talk a little about, and it was a great segue. Thank you, Eric. It's a little bit around equitable program access. So the administration has prioritized building resilient infrastructure that can withstand the impacts of climate change, that helps combat the climate crisis while investing public dollars efficiently to avoid waste and focus on measurable outcomes for American people. Another priority is to invest dollars equitably through a government-wide effort towards a goal of 40% of the overall benefits from federal investments in climate and clean energy flow to disadvantaged communities. Similarly, the Inflation Reduction Act includes provisions for clean energy production and infrastructure investments to meet administration priorities. So with that being said, I've got a polling question here for you. Should projects that serve distressed or vulnerable communities or populations receive special consideration? So it looks like we've got a heavy on the yes here, with about 86 coming in at yes. And so if I'd like to have some discussion about this, what are some of those special considerations? If you'd like to put it in the chat box or raise your hand and come off mute, we'd really love to hear those thoughts. So Maggie, do we have any hands raised remember, we're trying to really focus on those special considerations on how we can serve distressed or vulnerable communities, our populations.
Yes, we have Tyler Garrett. You want to come off mute?
Hey, sorry, mine was up also for the last one a little bit, so I'd make a statement with that as well. But my name is Tyler Garrett. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the Rocky Mountain Farmers Union, which is a general farm organization, farmer and ranch organization representing around 20,000 farmers and ranchers in Colorado, Wyoming, and New Mexico, who primarily receive their electricity from rural electric associations through their wholesale suppliers such as Tri-State, which in 2020 wanted to reduce coal-fired plants and increase solar and wind power. So Rocky Mountain Farmers Union, we do support IRA funding to assist rural co-ops and their wholesale suppliers such as Tri-State to retire coal plant assets with high debt and replace them with clean renewable energy. In response to the last question, and with this, we actually ask that and encourage less restrictive funding for farmers, ranchers, rural communities, and vulnerable communities, so that they can spend the funds as needed within their communities to make these improvements. This would be beneficial for farmers, ranchers, rural communities, and vulnerable communities served by these rural cooperatives, not just in our states, but across the nation, by replacing expensive coal and other resources of energy with low-cost renewable energy that will help to lower high electricity costs. And increased funding would also help stimulate these local economies in these vulnerable communities and across ranching and farming communities by providing farmers, ranchers, and vulnerable communities with lease and royalty payments, and as well as increasing local tax revenue. And we'll also increase investment and support for education of member owners and cost-saving energy efficiency and demand response programs. So thank you for this opportunity to comment.
Thank you so much. Maggie, do we have, let's hear from another person that may have some ideas how we could look at some special considerations for vulnerable populations and communities.
All right, we have Richard Campbell.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. So I am in a rural part of New Mexico. I'm a multifamily developer, and I think an area that has been neglected so far when we're talking renewables is multifamily development. We're trying to meet a niche for our affordable housing population. I understand you don't want to open up the floodgates and just tie residential as a whole to the IRA or to REAP specifically. That would be a whirlwind for our workers in our USDA offices. But there's not very many of us who are taking the time and spending the money to develop in these rural communities. And so I would humbly request that we look at multifamily at least as an option for the grant processes under the REAP program. And I think this is one of these disadvantaged areas that could easily be met. There's not a huge amount of development in rural America, but this would be a way to get clean energy directly to those who simply on their own would not be able to afford it. Hey, thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you, Richard. So that kind of leads us to our next question. Similar discussion here that we're having. We want to make sure that the projects which serve those distressed and vulnerable communities and populations truly benefit from this funding. So we're going to ask you, what criteria can we put in place, like such as priority points, higher levels of loan forgiveness, set asides to ensure this? What are some of your thoughts about what could we put in place? I'd love to hear from you. So please, if you have some, please raise your hand, or you can go ahead and put it in the chat box. Maggie, do we have any ideas?
Yes. We have one hand raised, Jerry Hobber, if you want to come off mute.
Hi, my name is Jerry Hauber. I am the energy manager for the Forest County Potawatomi community here in northern Wisconsin. And these special considerations, I would think, there needs to be a carve out specifically for the tribes. Here in Wisconsin, we have 11 tribes, and to be able to have a specific carve out that is specifically geared to the tribal communities in the rural areas is something that I think is desperately needed, because we are desperate in trying to install as much solar as we possibly can, but there are funding constraints that come into play that cause us issues. And then also on the energy efficiency side of things, some of the projects that we would like to do and need to do are at one of our casinos, which is in a rural area, and those casinos get pushed out of funding like this because they're just a casino or a hotel. So special carve outs and the ability to fund smaller casinos with energy efficiency projects, I think would be vital to the tribal communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. Val, do we have any comments or thoughts, ideas in the chat box?
Hi, Lou. Yes, thank you. We sure do. Kind of floating through all of them, but let me get back to the first one here. Marginalized groups in REAP have discretionary admin points, but these should instead be guaranteed admin points, as is the case for distressed community geographic map layer. That was the first one. The second one pertains to Justice 40, which kind of goes into some of the distressed or vulnerable. And it says Justice 40 can be served by allocating extra points on the application and offer a larger percentage of funding. Flexibility should be allowed in the applicant to explain how their community aligns with Justice 40 initiatives. Prioritizing technical assistance for grant writing for populations with Justice 40 in mind. Marginalized groups are often in the position of, one, not having the free admin time to complete applications, or two, not having the funds to hire a grant writer. We have a comment saying this should be a heavily weighted part of the application review. Another comment that says remove the cost share requirement for REAP, that is a huge barrier. And then we have another comment here that says, yes, projects that serve distressed or vulnerable communities / populations should be prioritized and heavily weighted to ensure that disparities in alternative fuel and utilities are not increased. Additionally, projects that identify and address the challenges for remote communities to access these funds or implement these projects should also be prioritized to overcome barriers caused by lack of availability of infrastructure, labor force, etc. Talks about finding a way to benefit isolated, disadvantaged rural households that are not connected to communities with capacity or ability to offer alternative projects, excuse me. A lot of great comments in here. Energy.
So Val, I saw someone asking for a definition of what does distressed community, what's a definition? I'd like to share that. And where USDA Rural Development, we get it is from the Distressed Community Index. And that is developed by the Economic Innovation Group. And you can go there, it's eig.org. We can put that in the chat box. And it's measured on 7 different indicators, measuring comparative economic well-being of a community, considering no high school diploma, poverty rates, adults not working, housing vacancy rates, median household income, change in employment, and change in establishments.
And Lou,
yes,
this is Jackie. I put the link to our RD priorities page.
Thank you.
In the chat. If you go to our RD priorities page, you can see the 3 key priorities for rural development, and in it there are links to the Distressed Communities Index and the social vulnerability.
Thank you, Jackie. I appreciate that.
Okay.
But that's important. And that really is how we build our foundation on defining those communities. And okay, so I appreciate, there's some great information. We've gotten some great ideas. I'm sure that John and Chris are excited to hear a lot of these ideas. And we're going to move into our next chat question. And while you think about putting the answer here into the chat box, I know that for our registration process, we did ask if you'd like to make a comment and to speak. If you are one of those people, if you'd like to raise your hand, I'm going to ask this question to put in the chat box, and then we're going to address a few of those as time permits after this one. So this next question, and I'd like you to really think about this, just go ahead and put your answer in the chat box. So to ensure active participation in rural development, IRA funding in distressed or vulnerable communities or populations, particularly with projects that will have an environmental justice impact, which stakeholders or partners should Rural Business-Cooperative Service reach out to? We'd really like to know, who could we partner with to help us lift this? And so think about that. And I can't wait to see your ideas in the chat box, but also be thinking about if you wanted to speak and you noted that in the registration process, then go ahead and raise your hand. And this information is really going to be helpful to our senior leadership as they work towards implementation of IRA and looking to build partners. Are we getting some great ideas, Val, in the chat box?
We are. We're getting some saying nonprofits such as circular development, resource conservation and development areas, RC&Ds, cooperative development centers, metrics together for data collection, storage, and analysis for grant applications, local housing authorities, Main Street communities. There's a network across the nation, many that focus on rural development and pay particular attention to green processes. We've got regional economic development authorities, healthcare, school districts, partner with rural multifamily developers, university outreach centers, EJ40 and nonprofits, regional planning, energy districts. So a lot of different options here. Rural CDFIs, native and tribal councils are a big one.
Thanks, Val. So what I'd like to do real quick before we move on is, Val, do we have any, excuse me, Maggie, any hands raised of people that may want to make a comment that were in our registration process that clicked that box saying yes?
We do not at this time have any hand raised for that.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure that they said they wanted to speak. We wanted to make sure that people had that option. So I want to thank you for these great answers. It's really giving a lot of information to go through, and please know that all your information, whether you spoke or it's in the chat box or in the comments, is all going to be taken into consideration. So I'd like to turn it back over to Sherry for our next set of questions. Sherry.
Hey, thanks, Lou. These next questions will be unique to Rural Utilities Service. So we're going to start with a polling question. Section 22001 of the Inflation Reduction Act authorizes a new financing mechanism for the RUS electric program that may provide partial loan forgiveness. The maximum amount allowed to be forgiven is 50%. Under the statute, the Secretary may authorize forgiveness above 50%. So the question is, should loan forgiveness be offered as a standard amount for all applicants, or should it be tiered based on certain criteria?
Sherry, we've got about 75% for tiered and about 25% for a standard amount, 25% and 75%.
Excellent. Excellent.
If folks have ideas for how to tier it, would love to have those in the comments section as well.
Absolutely. Be generous with those thoughts and ideas. So moving on to our discussion question. This goes along with our polling question. So please put in the chat or raise your hand if you would like to offer some circumstances, ideas of what circumstances should justify the Secretary exceeding the 50% limitation under Section 22001. Maggie, do we have any hands raised for anyone who'd like to verbally give their
Yes.
thoughts on this question?
We have Samantha Levy. You want to come off mute?
I do not have a thought on this particular question. I had raised my hand when you called for general comments, so happy to save until you get there. Unless
Okay.
you'd like me to give a general comment, but I don't want to derail your plan.
No, that'd be fine. Go ahead and
Yeah.
give us that.
Yeah, go ahead while it's on your mind.
Are you sure? I can wait. I really truly can.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. For my general comment, I'll just thank you all for hosting this listening session. My name's Samantha Levy. I'm Conservation and Climate Policy Manager for American Farmland Trust. And we are an organization that's been working on advancing smart solar in farm communities for a little over 5 years now. And just generally with the programs that we've been discussing, I want to advocate for a robust scoring process for these applications, especially for large scale solar projects, to advance smart solar that will meet the mission of all the agencies within USDA. AFT research has shown that solar projects to meet decarbonization goals are likely to be sited on farmland. We've modeled that 83% of all solar that may be projected will take place on farmland, with half on our best land for growing food and crops. And so for the focus of these programs, we encourage that programs like Rural Utility Services loan forgiveness and even REAP use their scoring processes to advance smart solar. And what that could look like for us is for all projects that are to be sited on farmland, we recommend that USDA require developers to develop conservation plans that identify best practices they will follow during construction, operation, and decommissioning to protect soil health, priority for a sister agency, NRCS. And then we also recommend awarding more points for projects that prioritize siting on land that's not well suited for agricultural production, awarding more points for agrivoltaic projects that pair solar energy generation with farming, and could carve out funding in the underutilized technologies section of REAP to advance this conflict reducing technology so it can become more of an industry standard. And then also developing scoring criteria that will ensure projects protect rural farm viability. For example, not displacing farmer renters or taking a significant amount of farmland out of production in a community. I'll submit more in my written comments, but appreciate the opportunity to voice that today. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Samantha. Do we have any hands raised regarding the circumstances? What circumstances should justify the secretary exceeding the 50% limitation under section 22001?
We have none at this moment.
Okay, all right. So Val, do we have any comments in the chat?
We do, yes. We have one comment that says 10% for LMI customers, 10% for pollinator-friendly plantings, 10% for specific GHG reductions, 10% for tax revenues for distressed communities. Another comment here states I would keep 50% max loan forgiveness. One talks about devising various categories such as environmental impacts, large-scale social, local-scale social impacts, planned community engagement, economic impacts, and sort and rate those, and that the higher ratings receive greater forgiveness. We have one stating greater than 50% loan forgiveness to a community that is fully converting to renewable sources or fully offsetting. Projects that target disadvantaged communities. I assume that's meaning those circumstances there that would exceed the 50%. And tiers weighted based on service to disadvantaged communities. Have another saying 50% should be the most allowable. One comment here is saying exceed the 50% limitation based on offtake allocated to rural utilities and or projects in energy communities or distressed communities. So some great comments coming in there and great ideas, and we thank you for sharing that as their leadership works to review and get these IRA funds designed to be used.
Hey, Maggie, in the
Yes.
chat, there's a Jared Mullendor who says he's got his hand raised.
All right, Jared, I'll take you off mute. Thank you.
All right, there we go. Thank you very much. Yes, I was looking for a time to get into general and not interrupt any of the conversations that have been going on. My name is Jared Mullendor, and I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the Renewable Fuels Association. RFA is the leading trade association for America's ethanol industry, so wanted to share a few thoughts on the HBIP program primarily. But first of all, thanks for holding the session and your openness to engaging with stakeholders. We have a lot of experience with HBIP. RFA has helped 39 companies in 21 states apply successfully for HBIP funding, resulting in the installation of over 1,500 dispensers and 151 underground storage tanks at over 200 locations. This has enabled the distribution of 138 million additional gallons of low carbon ethanol annually. Our first thought is we feel that lengthening the application window from 90 days to 6 months would significantly boost the HBIP program's overall success. Stakeholders begin at a time disadvantage because we cannot promote the program until the window opens. So that leaves an even smaller window to apply because most of the interested parties don't learn about the grants until weeks after they're posted. And of course, then you have the time to compile the application. Additionally, we'd encourage USDA to consider raising the dollar limits per entity so that larger chains with many stations can take full advantage of the expanded funding under IRA. Next, higher blends, including E85, represent a huge opportunity for HBIP. Many of the BIP and HBIP investments have supported both E15 and E85 infrastructure. However, there's a lack of attention from both automakers and EPA on the potential flex fuel vehicles have to decarbonize transportation fuel. So we would encourage USDA to engage with the White House, EPA, and others to look for opportunities to promote growth for FFVs. Likewise, federal fleets for the same reason with their density of FFVs. We also would encourage USDA to look at the future of sustainable aviation fuel under the HBIP program in the same way as marine and rail refueling is qualified. Finally, although we feel the demand for HBIP is strong, year-round nationwide availability for E15 would unlock even more demand. RFA encourages USDA to work with the White House, EPA, anyone else in the administration or elsewhere to support RVP parity so that E15 can be sold year-round. Finally, one quick note on REAP. Our members have used the REAP program for a variety of projects, and we see it playing an important role in reaching our goal of net zero carbon ethanol by 2050 or sooner. We would like to encourage USDA to utilize REAP as a vehicle to invest in low carbon technologies, both new and established at the farm and biorefinery levels. So we will clarify this in written comments, but really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Jared. We appreciate your comments. And now we're going to move to our next discussion question. Projects funded under the IRA are intended to increase energy efficiency, decrease consumption of energy, and increase the deployment and use of renewable energy and/or clean energy. Knowing this requirement, what metric or metrics are most appropriate to measure progress toward meeting the goal of achieving greenhouse gas reductions and the expansion of renewable clean energy infrastructure? Going to give you a second to think about that. It's kind of a long question. And I encourage you to please put your feedback in the chat or raise your hand if you would like to speak verbally. Maggie, do we have any hands raised?
Yes. Jason Kasovic.
Jason?
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to speak. Great question. On this front, I'm building a project right now that is sourcing energy data from customer-owned devices. I build solar here in Minnesota and was always frustrated because Farmer Joe doesn't have the same opportunity to participate as someone in the city on a more urban utility to sell their SRECs, their solar renewable energy credits. So they don't really have a way to manage it, and they needed a chance to get access to the energy data. And from the metric question here, I am looking at layering in localized grid fuel mix data to give emissions. So we take kind of the score of the time that it was generated at 9 a.m. or 9 p.m. It's a different score depending on what fuel is being used. And then that can show what that kilowatt hour of energy over that period of time was avoiding in emissions. So that's one metric I would think about is grid fuel mix and the avoided energy or the avoided emissions from it.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Very well stated. Thank you for that. So just checking, Val, do we have any feedback in the chat?
Yes, we have a couple of suggestions here. If a project is contributing to a state renewable portfolio standard, that should be considered. Another comment or feedback stating projects that can lead to the formation of hubs. This can be easily done through metering of individual units in multifamily settings to show the percentages of reduced consumption from the grid versus what was used via locally produced electricity. We have a comment here stating biofuels especially need to meet criteria for net GHG emission reduction using rigorous methods. And then we do have another comment just asking that USDA collaborate with EPA to standardize reporting requirements.
Good, that's good.
Yeah, automating energy data reporting from customer-owned, in parentheses, behind the meter devices with layered grid fuel mix emission avoidance data. So we're starting to get a few more comments in the chat here. So we thank you for that and for your ideas in providing some metrics.
Thank you, Val. And I think before we move on, we've got time for another verbal comment. Maggie, do we have anyone with their hands raised?
We do not at this time.
Okay. All right. So with that, just thank you for your feedback on this topic. You've provided some great thoughts and some great things for leadership to consider as we move forward. Lou,
Sherry?
Yes?
We just got a hand raised.
Okay.
Sean Hutchinson, if you wanted to come off mute.
Can you hear me better now?
Oh yeah, that's much better.
Sorry, I desktop and phone at the same time, different areas. I wanted to, we have some really impactful infrastructure. We're trying to find the right fit, and we're so happy about the IRA because it opens up great new opportunities. And I'm really, we have the ability to produce the kind of metrics and outcomes that are highly desirable in terms of energy efficiency and renewable energy, specifically getting to the Justice 40 initiatives and doing this clean energy transition in a much more sort of equitable way and doing that in tailored and specific outcomes. I think one of my main questions is how do we curate the kind of engagements that we need to see that there are program scoring and opportunities to support this kind of development process, because we've been waiting and looking for and actively working with various agencies to find the right kind of fit. And this new program could be really dialed into what we need to really make that inflection point happen and getting us to these goals. We are not yet on track for net zero anywhere near it altogether, but part of our infrastructure is going to be really important for getting that to these goals.
Thank you, Sean. We've got that information recorded. And if you've got any other question or comment, please feel free to raise your hand or enter it in the chat box. So Lou, now I'm going to turn it over to you to take us through our final series of questions for the day.
Thanks, Sherry. So as we get ready to start our next polling question, we'd love to hear from everybody still. I know we've got a couple of different types of agencies, our environmental agencies, our groups out there, just we'd love to hear from you. Okay, it's really important that we get the full cross section of everybody involved. This is really a great time to speak out. So our next question is specifically for the Rural Business-Cooperative Services, RBCS. You got to hear before from John a little bit earlier today. We're going to talk about section 22002. It provides additional funding for the Rural Energy for America program, known as REAP. A key difference under IRA is the ability for the agency to provide up to 50% of the cost of an activity carried out using grant funds. So our question is, should there be a standard grant amount or a tiered approach to providing this for section 22002? So okay, we're seeing a lot of activity already. This is great. We've got
The same as last time. If folks have ideas of what they should be tiered out by, love to hear that as well.
So we're at 72% that would like to see a tiered approach. We would really, like John said, we'd really love to hear about your ideas. What's that tiered program look like? That tiered approach. What's it look like? What are some of the thoughts? Loved it. We have a hand raised, Maggie.
Yes, Chris Wiley.
Thanks, Chris.
Yeah, so actually, my comments are really more HBIP related. I can go now, or I can wait, up to you.
That's okay. Go for it.
Okay. So I'm the head of regulatory affairs for Growth Energy. We are the nation's largest biofuel trade association. And we have partnered with retailers, both in the original biofuels infrastructure program, as well as the higher blends infrastructure incentive program, HBIP as well. Nearly 2,000 of the 2,800 sites selling E15 and higher blends today. Again, appreciate you guys holding this. Appreciate taking feedback and comment, and we will provide written comments as well. But echoing some of the things you guys have heard earlier, and just noting a couple other things for recommendations moving forward. The program should really cover all dispenser equipment, not just tanks and dispensers. There are a number of items sort of along the fuel chain that are really important. It is also important to consider flexibility on how retailers are selling higher blends. Some are able to access E15 from a terminal. Some are using E85 and blending E15. So it's important to recognize that as you include all different equipment. We also work with a number of multi-state retailers. A lower dollar cap amount is very difficult for multi-state retailers and really limits the ability for retailers to drive higher biofuel blend sales, which ultimately drives higher commodity use as well. We would also ask to give strong consideration for programs that replace traditional gasoline with higher blends like E15, and also give consideration. I talked about multi-state retailers. A number of these retailers face different processes for different states on environmental reviews. So it's very important to try and streamline that as much as possible, as that has also held up a number of these projects in the past, is working through a lot of those sort of differentiated requirements for retailers in different states. And again, I think we're happy to work with you guys as you put together the program we have in the past. And again, appreciate you guys taking the time.
Thank you, Chris. So Maggie, do we have some hands up?
Yes, we do. We have Michael Berge.
Hey, Michael, do you have some thoughts?
I do, and I appreciate the opportunity very much. My name is Mike Berge. I'm president of the Distributed Wind Energy Association, and we represent the mostly behind-the-meter wind industry here in the U.S., and that industry covers from very small turbines up to large turbines for large agricultural operations and ethanol plants, for example. So we agree with, I think Ann Messenkoff put into the chat with the Environmental Law and Policy Center, a tiered approach to the percentage of the grants, and sort of looking at meeting the objectives of greenhouse gas reductions, serving disadvantaged and low-income communities, and the projects of scale. So we don't think that 50% should be painted across all projects, and we will, in our written comments, provide specifics on that. They will be very, very similar to what the Environmental Law and Policy Center has submitted. I'm going to take the license to introduce another topic that we're very much interested in. Wind energy in particular would, I think, be characterized as an underserved technology. It was at one time a major component of the funding under REAP, which of course goes back quite a few years. But when imported solar came into the market with such attractive costs, and the scoring for REAP was heavily influenced by cost effectiveness, we found our companies were pretty much aced out of the grant process. We do hope that with this huge influx of money, 21 times what you had last year, it should be in the pot now or very soon, that you will, for underserved technologies, go to continuous process as opposed to a annual or a semi-annual process, depending upon the scale of the project, and try to move to an online application. We believe that there's room for tremendous simplification of the applications. We really don't think a 100-page application for a $20,000 or $30,000 grant to a farmer is appropriate or necessary or required in the regulations and legislation. So we look forward to working with you. We've got a great staff. We're pleased to see that there's more money to help you staff up, because we know that you're overworked and I assume underpaid, but I don't know that. The IRA, I think it was Stephanie in the opening said this is a once in generation opportunity. Well, I've been in this business almost 50 years. I can tell you it's a once in 2 generations process, because we started under Jimmy Carter, and there isn't anything similar to this that we've seen in our history. So thank you again for the opportunity, and we look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Michael. That is a great segue into our next question. So section 22002 provides additional funding for underutilized technology projects and technical assistance for the purpose of applying to the program. So what strategies should RD use to engage and encourage applications under this section? And are there ways in which products could be offered to fund underutilized technology and technical assistance? We would really love to hear from you. Raise your hand or go ahead and put those ideas in the chat box.
Lou, we have a hand raised, and it may be also on the prior comment as well, but I'm going to ask Andy Olson to come off mute, please.
Thank you, Maggie.
Okay, thank you. I hope you can hear me. I would like to address the tiered question, and so we can do about the others. I might come back for those. But I'm with Environmental Law and Policy Center, and we recommend very strongly a tiered approach to funding for the Inflation Reduction Act. And we point out that the Inflation Reduction Act introduced new funds and funding conditions related to those funds, and the agency should reflect those conditions. And the goals of the act were to reduce greenhouse gas pollution and to increase social equity. So we recommend that the cost share reflect that. So for example, any technology using fossil fuel, even if it's more efficiently, should have a cap of 25% funding, because that's still using fossil fuel. That new equipment will be in service for many years or even multiple decades. And the highest level, 50% cost share, be for non-combustion technology, for small grants of 50,000 and under in distressed communities, as well as electrification replacing fossil fuels. we discussed this more in our letter, but think that this would really be the best way to go to meet congressional intent. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Any more thoughts with this question? What strategies should RD use to engage or encourage applications?
So I have another hand up. Nicholas.
Thank you, Maggie.
If you want to come off mute.
Yeah, of course. Not to directly answer this question, but I did have a clarifying question. When you're saying technical assistance, does that include additional funding for the REDA program or REDA, or are we talking about something else here?
John, I'm going to ask you to take that.
And thank you for that. I was just going to add too, there are a couple of questions in the chat revolving around REDA that are asking if there's going to be more funding allocated for that. So I don't know if we know the answer to that, but John, if you would want to maybe address that one as well, that would be great.
So the technical assistance is fairly wide open. It's not identified for any specific thing at this time. So we're open to suggestions.
So here is your chance to give John some ideas. If you'd like to make any suggestions about what that technical assistance might look like. So Maggie, do we have a hand raised?
Yes, Abe Foe.
Hey there, guys. I hope that you can hear me. I'm at a conference right now for the solar industry, and I'm actually giving a presentation on REAP, REDA, and REAP and REDA. So this is super timely. I just wanted to ask if you guys would be willing to increase the 100,000 cap limit for running a REDA program, either for the renewable energy or the energy auditing side. And I saw some other guys that were asking for this because it's really, really difficult to try to run a program on 100 grand. So I think all of us are having to have someone in an existing position and use some of their time and do cost sharing. But then what happens is then we get all this interest, we build up all this, we do the outreach, we do everything, and then we can't follow through on all of the people coming in because the communication, we're off busy doing something else. So if we can hire a person to be our communication person or our outreach person, and they can share that, but they're just focused on REDA, that would make the program much more successful and sustainable. So
Thanks, Abe. We'll forward those ideas.
Lou, we do have a couple people that have asked if there's a definition for underutilized technologies or what is meant by underutilized technologies.
Thanks, Val. John, could we ask you to come on board and share that for us, please?
Of course. So in the past, it's really dependent, what underutilized looks like, and we're kind of searching for a way to define that. So again, open to suggestions. Like I said earlier today, the vast majority of our grants go to solar currently. Now, in the past, that wasn't true, right? So as new technologies become more mature, they tend to get more applications. But all of what we do is dictated by the applications that come in. We don't seek out any particular kind. So underutilized tech right now in my mind is not solar and not energy efficiency, although there's some forms of energy efficiency that might be considered that depending on what they're using. That being said, we're open to ideas here.
Thank you, John. So if you have any ideas that would help, John, just go for it and put that in the chat box. And I think, Maggie, we've got a couple more hands raised.
Yes, Amanda Fargo Johnson. You want to come off mute?
Thank you.
Hi there. Thank you so much. Amanda Fargo Johnson. I'm with Connecticut Resource Conservation and Development, and we've been administering the Connecticut Farm Energy Program since 2009. We assist farms and ag-based rural small businesses with energy efficiency and renewable energy project implementations. And so one of our services is to actually help those entities apply for REAP grants and loans. So we're very familiar with the REAP process and program. We've also administered several RETA grants and RBDG funding to help us to provide technical assistance to farms and businesses apply for REAP. So today my comments are specific to REAP. We do support an increase in grant levels to 50%. We do have some requests, and I put it in the chat, so hopefully this is appropriate. I was wondering if I could make some just general program suggestions in terms of the application process.
Absolutely, Amanda. Thank you.
Okay. So one thing that we find that can be a barrier to entry is for those farms who are not deemed eligible. We have a lot of non-rural areas, and if they don't meet the requirements, they're deemed not eligible by rural development. However, by state statute and even NRCS eligibility, they are considered farms and ag producers. So our request would be that there's a unifying eligibility requirement between the USDA agencies, as well as considering allowing new construction energy efficiency projects to be allowable under REAP. Many times farms want to do things the right way from the start, and those measures aren't allowed under new construction. We also would suggest that anytime state allocations come in, that we agree there should be a restricted pool fund, but in some cases those funds aren't fully utilized. So rather than transferring them back to DC, it would be helpful if those could be then transferred into the unrestricted pool to keep funds at the state level and where they were intended to be used. We also would like to suggest that having the deadlines twice a year, also allowing the unrestricted pool to be available not just in March, but also available in October, would expedite projects for many of the farms that we work with. We agree with other commenters that there is a need for increasing staff levels at RD in order to expedite environmental reviews, as well as award announcements that can sometimes be timely and hold projects up. So those are just a few of my comments and suggestions, and I appreciate your time today.
Thank you. We are getting ready to wrap it up. Maggie, maybe we could have one more hand, and then we're going to turn it back to Sherry.
Sure. We have Sean Hutchinson. He has his hand raised.
Hey folks, one more thing. We're a startup R&D company, and with cutting edge technology that has allowed us to engage with a number of different agencies, including the USDA. Thank you so much. If there are any other for the funding we do have currently, but I wanted to make a few comments to the technical assistance. In particular, for example, DOE has a phase 0 support program for SBIRS TTR, which is really helpful for first-time applicants to understand how best to make sure that their application is on target. The USDA and other areas has more of an open door policy when it comes to engagement with program manager and discussing priorities. Maybe not always evaluating the technology or the application, but having that kind of engagement type conversation to make sure the efforts are well spent, especially for small and mid-sized businesses who don't always have a surplus of time or money to pay or to do all of these things. Thirdly, I think a LOI, a letter of intent, may be useful. It does give some preliminary view of what the receptivity to the application may be. Usually they're 1 to 2 pages, reviewed by a committee that gives feedback and invites maybe another application. And maybe those comments could be a little more detailed, just to make sure we expedite this process. Those are the primary ones that I would suggest, but I think also making sure that these factors that dial into the Justice 40 initiative and the goals for the clean energy transition are scored in ways that are appropriate and maybe more favorable in a sense for the ways that small to medium-sized businesses may interpret these and have innovative technologies to solve them. Just making sure there's a place to put that, because some scoring ultimately is what decides this. And if you don't have the right scoring metrics, then you can't get the new innovations in. And we've seen this in various ways. So I just wanted to thank you for letting me voice this, because it's been a serious issue with just getting it in the right place. So I'm hoping this will open up new opportunities.
Thank you, Sean. And we are starting to wrap up for today. I want to thank everybody for some great discussions. We've learned a lot. We've taken a lot of information in. If you haven't had a chance to speak yet, please put your information in the chat box so that we, and everything in the chat box will be considered in our data discovery. And so, Sherry, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you, Lou. I appreciate that. And I appreciate all of you who took time today to participate in this listening session. I want to remind everyone that the session was recorded and it will be on the IRA webpage. However, just to manage expectations, it takes a little bit to get that done. We've got to synthesize this information, make it 508 compliant, and get that on the website. So don't expect tomorrow to go and find it, but just give us a little time. We want to make sure we deliver the best product we can so that you can share the recording with folks who were not able to be here today. Chris, I want to turn it over to you for you to close us out today.
Yes, thank you very much, Sherry. And thank you for all of the participants. All I can say is, wow, this has been an extraordinary session. I have personally learned a lot, and this has been very, very helpful to our efforts to be able to take these extraordinary legislative provisions and turn them into actionable programs. And it is always a joy for us at Rural Utility Service to share the stage with our colleagues at the Rural Business-Cooperative Service. It may not have been mentioned, but the rural development part of USDA consists of 3 agencies: Rural Utility Service, which as the name implies, we work with telecom, electric, and water utilities to provide basic infrastructure to rural communities; Rural Business-Cooperative Service, which finances all kinds of economic activity in rural America; and our Rural Housing Service, which provides financing for single-family and multifamily housing, as well as community facilities. So while I noticed in our polling question that some of you are new to USDA or RUS or RBCS, and we are so glad to have met you. And we will also want to extend an invitation to you to come learn more about all of our programs of all 3 of our agencies, because while there may be things that we're doing in our core programs outside of the IRA that might fit the bill. So really thank you for outstanding information today. And again, to emphasize, if you didn't have a chance to speak, or if there's some thoughts that occur to you, please feel free to post them in our linked area for additional comments. Let me leave you with a couple of big tips. One is, one may seem like a very small item, but can make a profound difference when the time comes to apply for funds. There is a program called the System for Award Management, or SAM, at sam.gov. And there's a link on the site here for key resources for sam.gov. In pretty much across the US government, to apply for federal assistance or federal benefits, federal programs, you'll have to be registered with the SAMS.gov system. And please, if you are already registered, check and double check that your registration is current. If you have not registered, even if you have the slightest thought of applying for one of these programs, please go ahead and get started. The sooner you get started on registering with SAM.gov, the better. With all the activity we've had through the tremendous infrastructure investment in this administration, with the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the CHIPS Act, and now the Inflation Reduction Act, you can guess that SAM.gov site can get very busy. So please, if you're even thinking about applying for these projects or other projects in the federal government, please go ahead and start your SAMS.gov registration. I did notice also a comment in the chat about projects that are already under construction. And just a quick tip here as well. Rural development has a single environmental review regulation. And our basic rule is that you have to complete your environmental review before you can commence construction to be able to preserve your eligibility for financing through the RD agency. So a project that's already under construction by definition has not been able to meet that requirement. However, the IRA, for example, in the provision we talked about today, will provide some opportunities to enhance existing projects, perhaps. And so that would be a new, perhaps, undertaking. But I just wanted to be able to address that because be very, very careful that if you should apply, as you're waiting to apply, that you don't jump the gun before completing environmental review. So it's been a wonderful afternoon. I know we have all learned a lot. And on behalf of the Rural Utility Service, the Rural Business-Cooperative Service, the Rural Development Innovation Center, all of us at USDA, and our federal agencies who have sat in with us listening to your wonderful comments, thank you for your participation, your ideas, your inspiration. And we are so excited to get these programs off the grounds, and your contributions today have made a big contribution and will help us do just that. A little advertisement. Tomorrow, Rural Utility Service will be flying solo because we will be focused on Section 22004, USDA Assistance for Rural Electric Cooperatives, which is statutorily defined for cooperative rural electric cooperatives. And so same time, same place, a Zoom channel here, of course, a different Zoom link, of course, from 2 to 4 tomorrow. If you are interested, we would also welcome your comments there as well. So thank you, everybody. It's been great spending Thursday afternoon with you.